Alfonso Cuaron. Messieurs, soyez bons.
Thank you, Thierry. So the conversation will be in English. I think it's...
Désolé.
Could be in Spanish, but I don't speak Spanish.
Désolé.
But anyway, you are, in a way, an international director because it's very interesting, your career, because you have the point of view of the developed country, the United States, and a country in this phase of development, which is Mexico. So it gives you two sides to the thing. So we are going to speak about it. But first of all, I would like to speak about your beginnings. I heard you had a camera at the age of 12, and you were born near the Churubusco studio, which is the famous studio where Buñuel and other people were shooting.
Well, if I just preamble with something.
That what you want.
Yeah, I just say I'm so thrilled to be here. So happy to be here in an event like this. And I'm so honored and touched to have been part of the 70-year festivities last night of the Cannes Film Festival in the presence of real, true masters. It was something really extraordinary. It was so beautiful. I was so touched and grateful to be part of and have been involved in this celebration. And we finished the celebration at the end of the dinner, the Mexican way, with mariachis and mezcal and tequila. So yeah, I think that we took over a little bit during the last night. And I realized something. I came to a realization. I'm not sure if Cannes really likes Mexican films. But they love how we party. That's for sure. But anyway, I'm so happy, so proud. And yes, well, it was not the Churubusco Studios, but there was other studios close to my house, very close to my house, and that they shot mostly commercials. And I would sneak into there, but that was not. But when I sneak into them, the only thing that I learned is that I was not interested in those studios, but I learned that you could sneak into studios. And so I started sneaking into the Churubusco studios. Yeah, that's...
But it's interesting to see the life of a director, how you did so many different things before making a first film. You photographed some films, some short films. You were an editor, even on the two Mexican films that we are going to talk about. Yeah. You were a screenwriter, so you developed a number of... and how did it gel together to become a director?
Look, I think that my journey is a journey that I would never recommend anybody as a pattern. No, because it's a journey, frankly, filled with insecurities. And that I admire so many of my peers and so many young filmmakers that they can start that career with such a confidence. Part of my insecurities, to be frank, were economic. Since I had a kid when I was 20, and so since probably I was 2019, cinema became my means for support. So I was living in a time in which the industry in Mexico was absolutely difficult. You know, it was very difficult for young generations to do anything. There's a lost generation before mine that they didn't do anything, except those two movies maybe. So the prospects were really were not good. And on top of that, cinema became the way of maintaining myself. So I consider myself a blue collar of cinema, in the sense that I started with the workers, you know, and always with my goal to become a director. I had a long career as a first assistant director. For instance.
I think you even worked with Ariel Dombal.
I worked with Ariel Dombal. I worked
as an assistant.
As an assistant, yes. I was Ariel Dombal assistant in a film he shot in Mexico. I was so happy to be here assistant.
Now she could learn from you.
Well, I don't know. I was just staring. So yes, it was, and my life, unfortunately, my career for a big part that I'm now exercising that, is being connected with that, not only cinema as the thing I love in life and my vocation, but also as the only way that I learned early on of how to survive. So that's something that was a big chain and ball that I carry through most of my career.
But before you studied cinema at the film school, you studied philosophy, and
parallel.
At the same time.
I didn't finish either. But yeah, it was a parallel situation.
But it's interesting because in this film school you meet Emanuel Lubezki, the great cameraman, DP, that has followed you except Harry Potter. I think he photographed all your films.
Exactly.
And he's an extraordinary cameraman.
I think in his own right, one of the most important filmmakers.
And after that, he worked with Tim Burton, with Terrence Malick, with Michael Mann.
With Coen Brothers.
And we could talk about his work because we will see some excerpts where he really shot quite extraordinary camera movements and so on. And you were also in school with Guillermo del Toro.
No, not in school.
Where did you meet
Because
him?
Guillermo is from Guadalajara. And how I meet, because Guillermo is another blue collar of cinema. And we share a lot of insecurities and ball and chains. And I think it's something that has bonded us from early in our lives. Early on, I was from a boom. I did 12 films as a boom operator, for instance, a microphone holder, and Guillermo was an assistant makeup artist, and I heard everybody talk about this genius of Guadalajara, and because even if I was just a blue collar among the young generation of filmmakers, I was known as someone with possibility, So when I started hearing about this weird guy from Guadalajara that was full of possibility, I got a little jealous, And I didn't meet him for a long time until, all my friends worked with him, and they all just talked wonders and how weird he was. And it was not until I was doing a TV show in Mexico before I did my first film, that it was some sort of twilight zone, that Guillermo and I, we call it the toilet zone, because budgets and so on. And I did my first one, and you got to write and direct and do everything. You have all the freedom to do little thing, And I did it. You shot for 3 days, and I was so proud of the result. And it was loosely based on a Stephen King book, novel, short story. And then one day I'm in the production office waiting for the producer in the waiting room, and there's this guy, this weird guy, just looking at me. And he had done one. I heard that Guillermo del Toro had done one of those. And it was this one awkward thing of two guys, like knowing who is the other guy, but like cautious. And he said, literally says, "You're Cuaron, eh?" I said, "Yeah, you're del Toro, eh?" Yeah. He says, "You did that thing that is," I says, yes. It's based upon Stephen King. And I was surprised that he knew the references. He says, yeah, how do you, I'm glad you found it. He says, yeah, no, and we started discussing Stephen King and how great that short story was. And then he takes a pause and says, the short story is great, so why you short suck so much? And I was, what? And he says, yes, and he started explaining me why, and he was absolutely right. And then we became best friends ever since.
So you were only 3 musketeers. There are 4, but you were 3. Inarritu, del Toro, and you. Mm-hmm. Well, what was your relationship, your particular relationship to Mexican cinema, which has a great history, from Buñuel to Arturo Ripstein? So what was your relationship to your national cinema?
Look, I belong to a middle class in Mexico in a period in which the so-called golden period of cinema had passed. And then there was this period in the 60s, there was a young cinema that highly interesting stuff happened. And then it became a very stiff industry in which audiences in Mexico stopped watching Mexican cinema. Because I was a cinephile since young age, I could follow the whole thing. And I soon identified, it was so clear for me who was the generation who was the masters, the new masters. You know, there was Ripstein and there was Casals, you know, and that I remember one of the films that completely turned my life around was Felipe Casals' films called Canoa, that I think has been like a big mark in my life and the way that I approach things. And my dream was to be able to assist them. And I have to say, I put myself in their services so many times, and I never had the opportunity to do so. Nevertheless, among that generation, there were very generous people as well. And those people also helped me. And I have to say, if I have to say, I sucked the teeth of that generation. I'm very grateful with that generation. Saying so, when Chivo and I started, Lubezki's Chivo, we were struggling like hell to get rid of certain tendencies that we didn't like of that generation. Unfortunately, a lot of that got into, and I say unfortunately, into the technical aspect of it, and the visual and the polishness of it. And I think that in a way that distracted my journey, and I dare to say Chivo's journey, maybe 10 years. In the sense that for too long we were concerned about creating a form, a good form, something that looks like we used to see French cinema or American cinema that can look, and Mexican cinema used to look a little funky. So, and I think ultimately, if I see in retrospect, was a distraction.
So we will start with the first excerpt, which is your first film in 1990, 27 years ago, which is, of course, a Mexican film. You start with a Mexican film. It's the story, in fact, of a Mexican yuppie who is like inspired, maybe you were inspired by Don Juan, the story of Don Juan, a man who seduces all the women, and particularly a nurse who is being dumped by him, and she does something about the test for AIDS, and he thinks he has AIDS. And we'll see a small excerpt, and I think it's very interesting because you see so many, it's quite different from your later films. There are so many details and a lot of editing. In a few minutes, in 5 minutes, you have maybe 5 or 6 different situations. How do you say solo con tu pareja in English?
The way they call it there, that in the Criterion collection is called Love in the Time of Hysteria.
All right.